Yes, welcome to Chatting Up the Chick. I'm your host, Chris the Chick. Yes, that's right, the Chick. I'm not really a chick, just the chick. Anyway, we won't talk about it. I've got a very special guest with me this week. His name is Jesse. He will introduce himself in just a second. But before we get there, I do have to just talk about the elephant in the room. Yes, my co-host, Mr. Phillips Janssens, is not here today. I can't tell you why, but it involves blue lights and a long night. Apparently, like that's the rumours I've heard. But last time we had Melissa Larsons on the show. Do you know Melissa Larsons, Jesse? She lives up in Palmy.
Yes, she grew up traditional Adventist Christian. Now
She did,
identifies atheist. Hey.
Yes, that's right. She was on the show a couple of weeks ago. I haven't put it up yet, but hopefully by the time this one goes on, it'll be up.
Yeah, funnily enough, I just had lunch with her on Sabbath lunch this last Sabbath.
Oh, fantastic! So you will resonate with a very articulate, intelligent young lady.
Yes, I feel a little bit intimidated now. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, you're following what she had to say, so you better be on your A game, son. You better be on your A game. So yeah, we're going to follow this kind of vein of just to get you caught up, Jesse. The last probably about 10 episodes we've done, it's all been around deconstruction of religion, especially institutionalized religion. I've always said I think there's a place for religion in the world because the term religion is just about bringing people together. But in the essence of something that's going to be good and it's going to be life-giving. And as we well know, the institution that is known as Christianity hasn't always been like that. But we don't really want to dwell too much on the negatives per se. We try to be positive because it's like in the 21st century, well, throughout the eons of time, everyone kind of just slips into that negative mindset and just allows that to take over. But the reason I wanted to bring you on is I thought after listening to Melissa, I thought it'd be great to have a voice that is at the other end of the spectrum. Right. Someone who still part of the institution. You're a pastor.
I am
of Seventh-day Adventist Church. I would love for you to start off by obviously introducing yourself and then giving us a kind of overview of what being a pastor is for you within the institution that you find yourself in.
Okay. All right. I'll give it a go. So my name's Jesse. I am originally from Australia.
Congratulations.
Yep. There we go. Whenever I meet Kiwis, I make sure to start off with, just to get out of the road, I am Australian. Please don't hold it against me. So sometimes it works and sometimes they do hold it against me, but nothing you can do about that.
It's lucky I'm English.
Yeah. No worries.
Yes.
So look, I grew up Seventh-day Adventist. My mum grew up Seventh-day Adventist. My dad converted when he was in his 20s. And so I had a fairly typical SDA Christian upbringing. I was a country boy. My dad was a farmer and I was homeschooled. So I pretty much had a lot of the tick boxes of what you would consider that weird Christian kid, Yeah. The homeschooled country boy who kind of lives out on the farm with his family. That was me. And I'm the eldest of 4 kids. My mum and dad ended up sending all of my siblings to school after I finished. I'm pretty sure after they were done with me, they decided, you know what, none of that. I'm going to send the rest of the kids to school. So that is what it is. But yeah, I through a bit of a journey, I found myself studying ministry and theology at one of our institutions over in Australia. I graduated, I got married, and I moved over to New Zealand, which is not something that I ever considered, it was not part of my life plan to ever move over here.
Sacrilegious.
I know. Terribly disappointing. See, here's the problem, Chris, is the Kiwis, at least a lot of them that I met at Avondale, where I studied, they go to Avondale, they study teaching, they study theology, they study nursing, and then they never leave. They just want to stay in Australia.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, and so what happens is New Zealand, the two conferences, the North and the South Island, kind of go, well, we need new pastors, but none of our Kiwis want to come back to us. Some of them do, but by and large, this is just sort of a gross generalization. They end up hiring young guys like me, and yeah, I don't regret any minute of it. I've loved my time in New Zealand, and I've been here with my wife for 5 years, coming up to 6, and yeah, loving life. So yeah.
Have you been at your present I was going to say parish? We're not a Church of England. Your current congregation since then?
No, I when I first moved to New Zealand, I moved to the beautiful city of Tauranga on the east coast. I was the associate pastor there, and I was also the associate chaplain. So it was sort of a pastor chaplain sort of gig. Spent 2 wonderful years there. And then I moved down here to where we are now in Palmerston North. And I currently am the pastor at Mosaic Community Church, at Masterton Seventh-day Adventist Church. I'm the chaplain for Palmerston North Adventist Christian School, and I am the young adult pastor for our region. So I wear a whole bunch of different hats. So life is a little bit crazy right now, but that's sort of where I'm at currently.
So sorry, do I see some grey hairs, or is that the light?
Yeah, no, you would not be. I would not be surprised.
So, in regards to, from your perspective, how would you describe? Because you have a slightly, what I would call, I don't want to use the term radical, but you have a slightly offset type of congregation.
Yes.
Can you explain that a little bit to people? Because I want people to understand that there's such a diverse continuum of different types of congregations that you can find within Christian churches. I think it's important because I'm not gonna lie, like I love the vibe, because I spent the weekend with Jesse a couple of weekends ago, and I absolutely love the vibe that I was experiencing, which is totally different to anything that I've experienced within the Seventh-day Adventist circles that I'd been part of.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. There is such a diversity of thought and congregation in Seventh-day Adventism. Here in Palmerston North is actually a really good sort of illustration, almost like a case study for that, because once upon a time, there was one church in Palmerston North, and there was a small church just outside. There's a little town called Longburn. We have Longburn Adventist College, LAC. There was a little church out at Longburn, and they ended up joining forces. So we had one church, sort of two churches becoming one, and that church began to grow. And there ended up being a traditional service at that church. Then there ended up being a Samoan service as well, and a contemporary service, all operating, all worshiping under the same roof. This would have been the late 90s / early 2000s that this happened. And unfortunately, as kind of it goes a lot of the time with churches, there was sort of an uneasy relationship between the three different congregations, the more traditional congregation, the contemporary congregation, and the Samoan congregation. And sadly, at one point, they split from one another, and the contemporary congregation became Mosaic, which is my church. And they planted as a community church, and we rent a school hall here in the city, completely unrelated to the SDA system at all. And we basically, the best way that I can describe what Mosaic is with that name. That was the original vision, because a mosaic is a series of broken pieces of glass, essentially, discarded, not very useful. But when an artist comes in and applies his craft, he can create something beautiful. And that's sort of a representation of what they wanted Mosaic to be. A bunch of people who are broken, but when come together under the banner of Jesus, can create something beautiful. So yes, you could kind of use the very obvious points of comparison. At Palmerston North Central Church, they sing hymns with an organ, more or less. Whereas at Mosaic, we use drums and a keyboard and a bass guitar. But to be honest, those comparisons are only fairly skin deep. I think really what defines our church is a willingness to try new things and a willingness to do whatever it takes to reach people for the gospel. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But I really appreciate their pioneering spirit. So, yeah.
Yeah, because I'm a very I've become I've become a very open thinker. So that's why listening to someone like Melissa, who was engraved into the system and then found herself completely out of the system, you know, there was a transition. It wasn't like just one day, bang, I'm going to believe nothing or whatever. But I'm intrigued by why. Like, what was the catalyst for someone to be so hardcore belief here to then coming over to the other side and having no belief whatsoever? And I found it very intriguing because when we was chatting, I suddenly realized something quite profound. We both have opposite end of the spectrum in terms of also our characters. So for instance, she was saying how she's like she needs an answer for everything, and she would bat on her side very vehemently to make sure that she had the right answer. And because she didn't get the right answer, it faltered her faith and she went the direction she went. And I'm at the stage now where, wow, I totally understand. Like, I would do exactly the same thing. Like if I had those characteristics. Yeah. Whereas I was saying, oh look, I'm actually in a place now where I'm quite happy not to have an answer. Like, I'm happy to put my hands up in the air and say, oh, I don't know. I really don't know. I have the destination, but how I get there, sometimes the answers are just not there anymore.
Yeah.
And I'm actually, I feel more free and happy now because of that, rather than feeling like I had all the answers. And the great thing about, so I've kind of gone on a roundabout trip talking about the same things I did last time, but the reason I say that was because I found talking to the people from your congregation and Capital as well in Wellington, I could have those open, authentic conversations with these people, and they wouldn't bat an eyelid. They'd be like, "Oh, yeah, that's cool," and they would actually listen attentively, not kind of start squirming and then try and answer back and come up with a pithy answer, or look around and try and find an excuse to go away because, man, this is getting way too heavy for me. So I really appreciated that, and that's why I've without going again into my whole story, I no longer associate with the Seventh-day Adventist Church. The only thing I associate with is the drama group.
Yeah.
Excuse me. And that's obviously why we was up there. And even then, there's things about the drama group that I kind of look at and think, yeah, that's not my gig. But I don't feel like I have to make it a big deal, if that makes sense. Like, I don't need to start saying, oh, I'm not sure about how you're praying, or I'm not sure about what you're saying there because that doesn't line up with my theology or whatever it may
be. You just made me think of something, if you don't mind. Because I've become a lot more compassionate towards people like Melissa recently, like the last recent few years. Becoming a pastor, you kind of take on a different lens when you look at people, because you have to kind of deal with everybody. You have to deal with the bleeding heart liberals as well as the hardcore conservatives and everybody in between. But one thing I've come to realize is that people like Melissa, a lot of what they believe has got nothing to do with the actual belief itself, but it's all to do with their temperament. I think there's a reason why there are, some very stereotypical characteristics that you would associate with conservatives versus liberals. Liberals tend to be a lot more open, not just even like open to new ideas, but just open. They're open people. They like to share things. Whereas conservatives tend to be a little bit more protectionistic. And I've also come to realize this because I married somebody who is completely different to me in that regard. Like, I think I'm a bit more like you, Chris, in terms of I'm very happy.
Whoa. No one's like me, all right?
Okay, I'm sorry.
Authentic.
I think I may share one or two small characteristics with you in that I'm happy to have a discussion and not have a definitive solid answer at the end of it. But the woman I married, Karina, is completely unsatisfied with that. She cannot leave things in the ambiguous space.
Yeah, no room for mystery.
No room for mystery. Well, I think there's mystery, and then there's like the whole idea of, well, we need to know what we believe. We need to know what we stand for. We need to know what as you were saying with Melissa, we need to know what the right answer is. And I honestly, I think some people, they just can't help it. It's just who they are. And, I think rather than arguing, maybe we need to have more compassion towards people like that, because I don't know that arguing is going to be good for them. I've had a few conversations with Melissa. I don't know her very well. I know her brother. I know her not as well, but I haven't found arguments with her to be that fruitful for me or for her.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I've got my next podcast episode ready then. Jesse versus no. One-on-one. It's on pay-per-view as well.
Is it?
I go wrestling. Royal Rumble. There you go.
Yeah.
Oh, funny. Just to kind of change the direction of this conversation, in lines with what we're talking about, in regards to seeing people walk away or deconstruct, like when you hear someone like me say, look, I don't want anything to do with the church institution as it is. I say as it is because I'm not against being part of a community that makes me flourish. Because one of the I still remember it. One of the hook lines for me from the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and I'm sure it happens throughout all churches, all religions, was you can't go around every denomination because there's too many of them. Like if you try to go to every church and find the right place for you, you're just wasting your time. You'll never find the right church for you. And I sit there going, oh yeah, that makes sense. But at the same time, it's a very destructive term of reference to use as well, because some people would then feel that they need to stay in a place that will slowly, it doesn't have to happen to everyone, but it can slowly start eating away at your soul to the point where you become very vindictive towards the people you're supposed to love, because you don't want to leave because someone has said in the past that, oh well, you can't go around every single church or denomination and find the perfect place for you. What's your kind of take on that? I suppose there's many questions in what I've just said.
No, that's fine. Well, I would first say that if that was a relationship, like a relationship between people who supposedly loved each other, therapists would call that Stockholm syndrome. You know,
Mm.
like you can't go to you're not going to have it better anywhere else. You may as well stay with me because there's no way you'll find what you're looking for, or there's no way you're good enough for anybody else in a different setting. So we would, if you were sitting down with a therapist, that would be incredibly toxic, and they would probably tell you to get away from that person because that person's obviously not good for you. I think churches can be the same. Um, I do find it. I'll be honest. I do find it awkward, and I do find it difficult because as a representative of the church, for all intents and purposes on this podcast, I am representing the institution. I do feel like I should defend the institution, but I also feel like there are certain things that are indefensible when it comes to some of the ways that the institution has failed people with dissenting viewpoints, or who are just trying to ask questions. I mean, that's all you're trying to do. And so when it comes to people who are turning away from the faith, honestly, most of the time, it's just because they feel like that the people that they're hanging out with, or the people that they're doing community with, just don't get where they're at. And it's funny because, well, it's not funny, but I guess it's not funny, haha, but it's kind of a little bit ironic. On the one hand, I want to see all diversity of viewpoints and perspectives in the church, celebrating unity as well as the differences. But on the other hand, there have been times when I've been talking to people who have been talking about getting away from their church family, and I've just said, you know what, it's probably better for you if you do. I guess the question that I would ask is, okay, if you're deconstructing, that's fine. I've had my own fair share of small deconstructions throughout my life. I think most of us had, on the small scale. But my question, I suppose, is where is it deconstructing towards? And when it comes to church communities, personally, I found that oftentimes people end up deconstructing back into the cycle, that the community, or a form of the community where they started. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no. I think people they feel comfortable with what they know,
Yeah.
so they'll automatically kind of revert back to being in those comfortable zones. Whereas I'm, if I'm being honest with you, I found myself going into a church service and sitting there and really struggling to find anything within what I was hearing or within the relationships with the people there, to the point where I was almost cringing when I was hearing what was being said. And I don't think that's because what was being said was inherently wrong. I just think what I believe has moved on to something different. But within the framework of, like, because I will always call myself a follower of Jesus. I just don't need to label that as a Christian anymore. So
Well, I think that word Christian has become so loaded,
Yeah, and I don't think there's anything wrong with people calling themselves Christians. Like I don't. Some people go really vehemently against Christianity.
Sure.
They're like, no, I'm not calling myself a Christian because Christianity sucks. It's destructive, and even though we all know that there's forms of Christianity that do absolutely wonderful work within the world, like really amazing stuff. If you actually delve in deep, just to things like, the Catholic social movement with Dorothy Day and stuff like that, and then you've got people who I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's called Project Jubilee. It's a group in America. So basically what they do is they get people to donate money to them, and then what they do is they go and pay off people's debts.
Oh wow.
Like, because in America obviously they don't have free healthcare, so a lot of people get into debt because they can't get insurance for healthcare. So this Christian institution write them a check and say debt paid.
Wow, that is cool.
Go off and have some freedom in your life. And I just think to myself, like, what a simple idea, but wow, how life impacting is that?
Yeah,
like amazingly impacting, because now these people, through no fault of their own, because of how the system treats them, they find themselves getting into mountains of debt.
Yeah,
we don't realize, like, living in New Zealand or Australia, how lucky we are to not live in America, who's supposed to be the bastion of democracy in the free world. Like,
yeah, I think I've become much more thankful for that in the last 12 months. So, but yeah, no, I totally get what you're saying. I think it's funny because where you're at, no longer associating with the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
Loosely.
Sure. Yeah,
but I wouldn't call myself a Christian or a Seventh-day Adventist. That's not my vernacular anymore.
Okay, it almost allows you, though, a certain sense of freedom. For how you reconstruct, and obviously, like, there's no way that you can put a time frame on what that looks like. But I think after every deconstruction needs to come some sort of reconstruction.
Yep.
And if you're not there yet, then obviously this is not the right time for that conversation. But it at least it's honest. Whereas I found that majority of people who are deconstructing their faith, or at least have deconstructed their faith, are still just chilling out in church, just kind of dead. Like, the amount of times that when you kind of get down to it, why are you going to church? A lot of the time it's, well, that's because the people that I grew up with are in church. I like hanging out with them, and they go to church, so I guess I'll go to church too. There's no sort of deeper sort of heart longing for spiritual greatness, or to interact and be with the divine, or hear a word from God, or the things that you would normally associate with somebody who's like totally on fire for Jesus or something like that. So, like, just honoring where you're at, you've made this choice, and now you have the opportunity to have these conversations in an honest way. So yeah.